Hello, everyone. How are you doing? This is Adebola. Welcome to Analyze This Views from Home and Abroad, a Nigerian history podcast co hosted by myself and Noche, with the assistance of our scriptwriter and research assistant, Osas. This podcast is a unique initiative to explore Nigerian history from diverse local and global perspectives. Join us for insightful analysis and engaging conversations that uncover the stories shaping our understanding of the past and present. Guess what? On this episode, I interviewed Dr. Abdulkadir Adamu, a professor and managing director at Ahmadu Bello University Zaria. We spoke on the walls of Zaria, its historical context, and what that means to us today. Please enjoy listening.
My name is Abdulkadir Adamu, and I'm a professor of history and the immediate past head of Department of History in the Faculty of Arts, Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. And I have been working since 1990, May 1990. And my area of specialization is economic history, but we delved into all other aspects of history, both social and political history. So I'm very much at home with most of the branches of history, and we also do some social work, that is consultancy with NGOs and things like that, and some research. I do biography also.
Okay. So
that's about me.
Okay. So thank you so much, Professor Adamu. Thank you. I really appreciate your time. And so let's dive right in. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a general, a brief, information. So the walls of Zaria is a historic and cultural landmark in Zaria, Nigeria. It is said to be built by the Queen Amina of Zazao. The walls are fortify the city and her military camp. So it serves as a model of defense across our state. So the walls, right, it showcased the growth of urbanization at that time. That's what the walls showed, and the state of society in sub-Saharan Africa. So now in terms of the questions, like what would you say the origin of Hausa people? What is the origin? What will you say? Do you have anything to say about the origins of Hausa people and how that contributed to the walls, of building the walls, the method of building the walls? Yeah.
Well, like all indigenous people of Africa and other parts of the world, the Hausa people are said to have originated from around the shores of the Lake Chad and other areas around those places. And through migration, they were able to find themselves in their present location. However, we have traditions of origins that, we have this Bayajida legend of origin, which claims that Bayajida came from the Middle East or Mecca and migrated to Borno, and from Borno moved downwards to Daura, where he married the queen and had children that spread to the so-called 7 Hausa states. But obviously that has been debunked, because the mere fact that when Bajida migrated, there already existed the various states of Hausa land. Obvious that he was neither the founder of the states nor the people. So it is expressed that the Bajida legend was just introduced to explain the nature of relations between the various Hausa states, or to try to link them together to show that they had the same origin. But it is not necessarily the case. So some scholars argue that it is just maybe a point of political changes in dynasties, and attempt to create a political linkage and relations between the various states of the area. So this is the situation. And when you look at linguistic classification, the Hausa language is still grouped among the Chadic language family and of the Afro-Asiatic group of families. So the origin of the people is within the Sahara and the areas not far from it. That is the exact origin of the Hausa people. Of course, there was, migration is a constant phenomenon, that new groups are coming, they are integrated, they are subsumed, and they influence the original group. So to date that we have this term of the so-called Hausa Fulani, a fusion of the Fulani as a result of intermarriage, the jihad, and what have you. But still, you have Hausa people distinct from Fulani people, and you have a mixture. These urban Hausa speakers are mostly a mixture of various groups. So that is how the current people emerge.
So you were talking about migration and settlement, and basically, how do you think that has influenced architectural design or urban planning in that pre-colonial Nigeria? In reference to like the walls of Zaria, like how do you think that has influenced it?
Okay, the construction of the walls.
Yes.
Well, while we want to claim or maintain that we independently got the idea of walling settlements, but at the same time, you cannot dispute the fact that there were migrations, there are also trading relations with various parts of the world. So people must have acquired various influences because this wall building is not limited to Hausa land. For instance, there is this walls of Benin, which Benin Kingdom, which is deep in the forest belt.
Exactly. We covered that in the earlier episode. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can't say that Africans did not develop the idea on their own.
Mm.
Even if there are influences, there are also adaptations to local environments. So the nature of the environment of Zanzau, that is the name of the state, that is the kingdom, and Zaria was the capital. So the construction was necessitated by issues of security and defense, because Zaria was not the first capital of the Zazzau kingdom. There were other capitals before the eventual movement to Zaria. The other capitals were Uchichiri, Kargi, Turunku, then Kufena, and then finally Zaria. So the necessity for the construction of the wall was because of the need to provide defense. But in the issue of the defense, there was also a need to have enough land so that people during siege or attack, you have sufficient land to cultivate the food that the people, the inhabitants of the city, will be able to rely on for in case of prolonged attack. Then there was also the need to have water supply and water view. So that was why the building was done. And from the traditions internal to Zaria and Hausa land, there were reference to outside influence. But it is clear that there could have been outside influence, as I said. But normally there were adaptations to local conditions and also to locational issues.
Sometimes, not sometimes, we see in European structures that there were moats that they used back way centuries ago. And you also see that structural design in African walls or African architecture. Do you think that there's a connection there?
Well, I don't think there's a connection with European walls, but there could be connections with walls around North Africa or Northern Africa, Eastern Africa, and from Arabia down to the Indian Ocean areas, because there are evidence of remnants of African groups that migrated to those areas in China, around India, and in Arabia. So the fact that Africans were there shows that there were connections. But so far, there is no evidence. Of course, even in Europe, it's possible because from evidence, there are indications that even some Roman emperors were Africans of African descent. They were blacks, including Britain, England. And there were also indications that even in Latin America, when Amerigo Vespucci and the others first landed in Americas, there were evidence of black people. And there were traditions that under Mansa Musa, many canoes moved across the Atlantic, but never came back. So it's possible there were these movements and influences. It's just that we don't have enough evidence or information to support our claim, but there are all indications. And I saw one program, one person from Niger Republic, who was able to decipher the hieroglyphics writing. He claimed that the writings were actually in Hausa. He was able to translate some of this, but I have not been able to follow it up. So there are various indications that there is a linkage. And it was said that the magicians of the Pharaoh during the time of Moses were actually from around the old Ghana, Songhai areas, which are Black African areas. And we can see that the gold of Mansa Musa that was said to cause inflation in Egypt at the time was actually from this present Burkina Faso and Ghana area, because they still have gold and they are mining it. So there was a connection already. So there were connections, only that we don't have enough written explanation to have those things. But there are bits of evidence that show that there are various connections. There were clear evidence that there were relationships. For instance, the Songhai were able to colonize, or what I mean, they integrated or conquered parts of the old Kebi Kingdom, and some other parts of Hausa State. There were relationships. So from there, it is a vast world. People have been moving from all directions. Only that the movement cannot be compared to the present, where if you like, in the next one day, you can be in anywhere, in China or in UK, USA, anywhere you want to be, once the resources are available. Yes.
So will you say that because the Europeans also had walled fence, like defensive walls at that time, and in this case, we're talking about Zaria had walls as well, and I'm sure that there are various walls aside Zarian walls that are all over Africa. Would you say that because they adapted to the environment and they were living in, therefore they had those moats, just the way you see moats in Europe as well? Would you say that?
Yes, because of their environment and the fact that, when states are emerging, initially you have small state system. Then you begin to have efforts by various small states. The bigger ones will try to consume the others so that it will form a larger state. So the process of conquest and expansion necessitated the construction of walls. Because once you construct walls or you have moats around, it makes it difficult for the enemy to penetrate or to come unannounced. You have your walls, you have the gates. To break it, it will not be an easy task that somebody will not be aware. And the fact that the terrain of Zazzau, you find that Zaria has a network of hills all over, just like the plateau. There are many rocks. For instance, presently in Zaria city, you have about 2 or 3 rocks that are prominent. You can see them from a distance. In addition to that, all over the kingdom, there are also these rock formations. As you come from Kaduna, you see rocks. On your way from Kaduna to Zaria, there are rocks. On your way from Zaria to Jos, the capital of Plateau State, there are many rocks along the line where it is virtually indistinguishable from Plateau State. So it makes it maybe it gave the people the idea that they needed to have walls, and then they incorporated the rocks so that you can even climb the rock and see potential invaders from a great distance. Even the immediate past capital of Zaria, which is located about 5 to maybe 10 kilometers from the present Zaria city, is also around Kupena, which is named after a rock, Kupena. That is where the missionaries settled in Zaria, around Musasa. So this issue of rock formation is prominent in the environment of Zaria and the Zazzau Kingdom. So it must have played a prominent role.
How, we're talking about cultural diffusion and migration of people into the city, out of the city. I would like to know,
Yes.
can you tell more or shed more light into how people were still able to sustain or to preserve the culture and these customs, even though there were invasions here and there?
How they were able to preserve their,
Preserve or
you
sustain,
see,
yes,
or sustain their culture,
or sustain the culture.
even with the walls or without the
Even
walls.
even with the walls and invasion, how do you think they would have had retained their cultural values central to the to Hausa people itself? given that there's a lot of invasions or wars or warfare?
Okay, you see, when we say that there were series of wars, it doesn't mean that the history of the area was just of wars and invasions. You know, there is this Eurocentric perspective that seems to portray African societies as always consumed, that the major theme of the history is warfare and divisions. It's not the case. It's just that in all human societies, at that level of development, there were wars and warfare. Because if we take the example of China, for instance, it has these great walls of China. And likewise, if you look at European history, you find that there have always been wars of conquest between France and Britain, between the Germanic principalities, because there was no Germany before. It was Prussia and other states, Austria, Hungary, Poland, Russia. They were always fighting. This Serbia and what have you. There was always warfare. So likewise, even in Africa, there was warfare. Each state trying to project its power in order to get more resources, in order to attract population and things like that. So the warfare that were taking place was not just for the sake of fighting sake, but it was done in order to project power or to take over some trade routes, because trade was very important. For instance, you know, there was this trans-Saharan trade, which the trans-Saharan trade started from Arabia, the heart of Arabia, cuts to North Africa, the Sahara, Hausa land, down to the present Nigerian Middle Belt, to the forest belt. Forest belt, all these forest kingdoms, especially great old Oyo Empire, down to Ghana, the Gold Coast and other places, trading. So it covered a very long distance, and it covered so many articles, wealth, and resources. So every kingdom wants to have access to that trade route. So even that will cause warfare between states. For instance, look at what is happening in Niger, in Burkina Faso, and what have you. It's all over resources. The Europeans are just taking our resources without paying for it. It was exploitation, just like colonialism. Look at what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. But you see, if it is between the white people, they don't look at it as barbaric or whatever. They will look at it as if it is conventional warfare. But if it is in Africa, they will say it's banditry. They will call it all sorts of names, and which is unfair. So we have to consciously change the narrative, because you don't know where this interview will stop. And they will say even Africans are saying that we're having constant warfare and killing ourselves. But it's not true. In fact, our own wars were even better. The captives were integrated as part of the society. Even you are slaves, you integrate them, they become part of your society. But in Europe, a slave remains a slave for centuries. You can never be integrated as part and parcel of the society. So ours, I'm not trying to glorify
No, you're not.
Africa objective.
Mm.
Yeah. So you find that because of the interaction, these are societies that have existed for hundreds of years. So as a result of the interactions between various people, they have already developed a complex form of languages, cultures, and other ways of doing things. So the fact that people were coming and going didn't change anything. For instance, if you in Zaria, for instance, that is Zaria city, the capital, you have a Yoruba diaspora community that have been in Zaria for more than 300 or 400 years. They have been there because of the transparent trade. There are intermarriages, but they were able to retain their identity because new people were still coming. They are still coming. You have Nupe groups, and they have their specializations. For instance, the Yoruba, they were bringing cola nuts, and other forest products. Likewise, the Nupe. But the Nupe, in addition to that, they were skilled blacksmiths and textile manufacturers. So they have been there. And you also have Arab merchants communities. But that one, with time, they were they no longer exist because they have been integrated. There are no people coming, fresh supplies. But these ones, because they were indigenous, they were quite close. New people are coming, some are being integrated, but still some are new ones are coming. All those who want to marry, they go back home and bring their wives. So the culture is sustained. Just like you have Hausa communities in southern Nigeria. But you see, if you see the Yorubas in Zaria, there is no difference with us. That they retain their language, but you cannot tell that they are not Hausa. You cannot distinguish because they don't have marks. Only a few have marks. So there is no way you can tell that they are Hausa or not Hausa. Just like if you don't know the difference between Italians and French and what have you, if you see them, you just say that they are all white people. So this is how these other migrant communities live in Zaria.
So yeah, go ahead.
Because of the size of the population, size determines the continuity of language and cultures. Because they are in their millions or hundreds of thousands, so they will be able to sustain their language, their culture, and what have you. And there are also other kingdoms and cities of the same Hausa-speaking people. So the language and what have you is being able to be sustained because there are interaction with these other people. And then there has not been any remarkable migrations like in tens of thousands. Those migrants coming were mostly traders and merchants and maybe Islamic scholars or slaves that were incorporated. Their number was not such that will affect the composition of the population, but they were still be able to have a significant influence that they are able to maintain a quota or quotas around the city. That is it.
Now we're going back to the walls of Zaria. I know that it has 8 gates. How does it look like? How did it look like then, and how does it look like now?
Okay, the walls then were quite high and big, but they were made of wood and iron. And the iron fabrication is in form of sheets, thick, long sheets that were joined together but through local iron work, not like the present gates we have. In the gates, there is need to have what do you call it? Where you have windows and doors. It has a name. Builders. When you are constructing a house, when you come to the window or door, you have to cast what they call. There is an iron something you build when you are making a window. Okay, those things, were made of wood in order to create the door, the entrance. And then they have small windows at the top so that they can use it to shoot arrows on strangers that try to break the doors, the gates, without necessarily coming out to fight. You reduce the invaders by shooting a lot of arrows so that you reduce their number. They also climb on the top of the wall and also shoot from there. Before, it's only when they are sure of security or whatever, or they are sure that they are in the offensive and it was to their advantage, then they could open the gates to attack. In addition to that, even friendly visitors, you don't just open your gates unless you are sure who were coming. But in peacetime, when there was no war, the gates are opened during the daytime. But as soon as it was night, maybe around 6, 7, maybe before 7, anytime when it was getting to sunset, let me use sunset instead of time. So during sunset, they will lock the gates and it will not be opened unless they are certain that it was friendly people. In fact, there are information or traditions that the gates were never opened once it was night. The person, wherever you come from, you sleep outside. So whenever there were trading caravans, they stay at nearby villages and only arrive at the gates of the capital during the daytime, whether it was morning or afternoon or evening, but never when it was late for security reasons. That was how the gates were done.
Now, in terms of what about the walls? The walls itself, how did it look like, and what does it look like today?
Okay, the walls at that time were quite high.
Mm.
Maybe I don't want to cite meters, but they were quite high, very tall, that horses cannot jump across because people, some use cavalry and try to jump. In addition to that, they were also very thick, very wide, in such a way that you cannot breach it. When the British conquered Kano, it was not easy. It took them a long time for them to be able to break the walls of Kano using the Maxim gun and what have you. And also, even the gates was quite a challenge for them. I'm using Kano because there was no actual battle for the conquest of Zazzau. So that shows the strength and the thickness of the wall, because the thickness of the walls could be up to 10 feet in breadth, not in the length above. From the base, it could be up to 10 feet in thickness. But as you go up, the thickness was reducing so that it will be able to sustain itself and to have balance. At the top, it was made in a cone shape so that rainwater will not settle. Instead of making it flat on top, it was made sharp, like an edge. If you have like a pyramidal shape,
Yes.
The edge, you have sharp edges that when the water falls, it is pointing upwards. It will not settle on the wall. It will just run up. It will slide on both sides. So that was how the walls were made. Because they were mud walls, rainwater was not allowed to fall on it, to stay on it. The moment it falls, it will just run up, down. And then it was constantly maintained. Like maybe after 3-4 years, it was replastered with the same mud materials, but adding some other materials such as animal dung from horses, from cows, and the prawns of what do they call it? This Dorawa tree, which is not only shea butter, but there is one other tree, the bark of the fruits, which is water resistant. So it's made in such a way that you see it as if it was plastered with cement. Water does not penetrate it. So it helps it to remain strong and solid for long.
Are there
That
any
was how.
are there, are there any designs that reflected the Hausa culture, the Zaria culture, or the Zazao at the time? Yeah.
Well, you see, it's only there was a time they renovated the wall that there were designs, yes, but the designs were mostly like this northern, what they call it, we call it dagi, this something like a star, the symbol of northern Nigeria.
Okay.
It has some similar designs like that were local designs, made with hands. The designs were deep incisions with the fingers,
Okay.
deep inside. You see it. Let me give you example of Yoruba marks. You
Okay.
know this this big marks on the cheek.
Yes.
Okay, to just use that. So it was made deeply inside so that when water runs, it's like you are making a drainage for it. But it was actually in design shape. Something like that.
Okay. Okay.
Mm,
So
yeah.
basically, the designs were in such a way that it signified Zazao or itself.
It was done in such a way that it signifies Hausa architecture and Hausa decorative motifs, because the designs were not only done in Zaria, but they were done in other states of Hausa land.
Yes.
So it's difficult to say whether it was actually a creation of Zaria. You know these things about culture, and when you have a culture that is largely spread across kingdoms, you find that there are borrowings. Of course, there are some peculiarities which only people who are experts, maybe like students of architecture, students of building, will know that, or historians who are concerned with engravings and that. But I was never curious about that actually.
What is being done with preserving the walls today? We see that there's a lot of ruins, and given the climate of the country, the generation now, the focus is quite different. But what do you think is being done? We said that some some firms like Bena Associates is doing something, but are there other firms, or is there any efforts by the government to preserve it, or even by you have the Arewa House? Is there anything being done to preserve the history of the Zaria walls?
To be sincere with you, there are no efforts to preserve the walls. They are just going down. People are building houses on it. People are demolish it to obtain art materials for building. But we can say that the history of the walls are being maintained through research by our students, especially postgraduate students. I supervise a walk on the walls and gates of Zazzau, that's Zaria, by one of our students. And then there are other studies by other scholars on the walls in other places, such as Katsina and Kano. So yes, there are studies, but no any significant government intervention that is known for now. For now.
Okay, so the theme, this is the last question. So the theme is we're talking about, because we spoke about the walls of Benin, now
Yes.
the wall of Zaria. We're talking about sustainable architecture. Is there anything that we can learn today as individuals, we can learn as Nigeria from these walls that were constructed many years ago?
Okay, there are some important lessons we can learn from the walls of Zaria. That is, we have the knowledge, the technical knowledge to build walls or homes to date that are sustainable from our local materials. Two, we also have the local materials that we can use to make buildings without the need of importing anything, which is very significant in terms of sustainability, in terms of economics, of scale and management. Then I said the third lesson is that we also have materials that can strengthen our buildings to make them even much stronger and more sustainable. Then finally, it is also a lesson that the difference between our traditional building materials with which the walls were done was the fact that there was need for constant maintenance in order for it to be sustainable. It's unlike these concrete works that you can leave it for 5, 10 years, 20 years without maintenance and nothing happened. In the case of more buildings, it required regular maintenance in order for it to be sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adamu. Is there anything you would like to add to what has been said before we end this interview?
The only thing is I want to add is that I'm delighted by your interest in traditional architecture and buildings, and that will help to pass down our achievements and our strides in history, and it could be a pointer to the fact that we can still continue with our traditional buildings, but of course with modern adaptations so that we do not lose our culture. In addition to that, it will help also if we can sustain it and continue to develop it to provide accommodation for us as part of the Millennium Development Goals for housing for all within a certain range of periods in our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. If you've made it so far, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dr. Adamu and you were able to learn something from it. You can also comment on all our platforms: Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast, AfroPods, and Amazon. Remember, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so more people can have us in their ears. Thank you so much once again, and see you on the next episode. Bye.